Hello, YouTube. Welcome to my channel, Marriage, Politics, and Sports. Today, I'm just kind of going to go over this little piece that I saw from The Hill, and it's talking a little bit about Donald Trump getting some revenge or some payback against a couple of the law firms that try to put him in jail. And I want to pose a question to some of you out there, whether he has the right to do so. Do you think he's petty for doing it? But first, like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Hit that notification bell. Matter of fact, and send it, share this. I'm getting into this political side of my handle, Marriage, Politics, and Sports. There's always something to talk about now that Donald Trump is in office and he's moving so fast. I think we're going to hit on a little bit of the judges and stuff like that. Maybe. I'm not so sure if they touch upon some of that here. They might. But anyway, so I'm going to be looking at this just like you guys and try to have some commentary to some of the things that I think about, especially since we used to hear the Democrats talking about, is he going to use the Justice Department against his enemies? And it's kind of a projection type question after he spent 4 years under attack by all arms of the Biden justice system. So let's go ahead and listen to what these gentlemen have to say from The Hill, and we'll move on from there.
A prominent law firm has made a deal with the Trump administration after being targeted by name with an executive order. The president took aim at the Paul Weiss firm last week, signing an order that would have suspended active security clearances of its attorneys and cancel any federal contracts, all because a former partner of the firm worked on a criminal case against President Trump while he was at the Manhattan DA's office. But in a quick reversal, the order has been rescinded after the head of the firm visited the White House this week and made concessions to the president. It highlights.
Well, listen, first, do you think that's fair? First of all, I do. I think the president has every right to not work with law firms that try to put him in jail. If you have a managing partner on that board that try to put him in jail, then how could you trust this law firm to have your best interests in mind with that partner there? So I think it's well within his rights. As a matter of fact, not only did he get them to acquiesce, they're paying him some retribution of some of the costs he had to, I guess, spend to defend himself.
Highlights the length Trump is willing to go to punish those who cross him and the extent private individuals will go to acquiesce to Trump's demands. Joining me now is the Hill's courts and legal reporter, Zach Schoenfeld. Zach, Brad Karp, who heads the Paul Weiss firm, met face-to-face with Trump at the White House. What do we know about the deal reached to see that executive order dropped?
Hey, Drew, this deal includes a few components. So one of the big ones is that there is now a $40 million commitment from Paul Weiss to spend on the equivalent of pro bono legal services for causes aligned with this Trump administration. So some of the examples that were given in the announcement were work on veterans issues and also work combating anti-Semitism. We've heard a lot of criticism from the president's allies, and this is nothing new, that so much of the pro bono legal work done by big law firms goes to liberal causes. You see that playing out right now in so many of these lawsuits currently going through the courts against the Trump administration. Now, beyond that pro bono commitment, there are also a few other components. They have committed to merit-based hiring and some of the rhetoric around Trump's anti-DEI push. And then also there's some statements regarding what is called bedrock principles of American justice. But it's that pro bono $40 million commitment that certainly jumps out in this deal.
Well, the White House has said that Karp acknowledged, quote, wrongdoing by one of the firm's partners. What was it specifically the firm was targeted over?
Yeah, that comment of wrongdoing references a former Paul Weiss partner named Mark Pomerantz. Pomerantz left the firm to go work for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in its criminal investigation of Donald Trump. That investigation ultimately led to the hush money case that went to trial last year and resulted in the first and only ever criminal conviction of a former president. Unclear exactly what Trump means by wrongdoing, but
well, listen. One of the things, one of the things that they didn't emphasize here is by leaving this law firm and working for the government, he took a tremendous pay cut to go after Trump. right? The government doesn't pay like no private law firm. I can't imagine they didn't really touch this at all, but he had to take a tremendous uh, decrease in pay just to get Trump. You know, that wrongdoing. Listen, if you really look at the merits of the case, if you break it really down, Trump, they try to put Trump in jail for shit they just made up. I mean, he's essentially wrote a check from the wrong checkbook. I mean, essentially, if you just cut out all the bullshit, he essentially just wrote a check from the wrong checkbook. Nobody at his level goes to jail. Most people don't go to jail for that, much less make that into 34 felonies. It's a bullshit charge, and I would imagine that sooner or later we're going to see that whole thing thrown out, and maybe Letitia James get disbarred over some bullshit like that. I mean, you know, even though it was I think whatever Alan Bragg or whatever what it is, they did some bullshit on this thing.
Pomerantz had played a very prominent role in that investigation before charges were ever brought. He had actually been helping to build a criminal case on something completely unrelated to that Stormy Daniels hush money payment. Instead, Pomerantz was trying to build a case on Trump over unrelated financial crimes. Pomerantz resigned from the DA's office after Alvin Bragg was elected district attorney and refused to bring an indictment against Trump on those grounds. Now, of course, we know the DA months later returned to the table on the hush money prong to bring that indictment of Trump. But Pomerantz has continued to loom large in Trump's mind as he views everyone who worked in that office as politically biased against him. And now you're seeing that play out in some of these executive orders and this retribution campaign.
And Zach, this deal seems like another instance of companies willing to strike a deal with the president after finding themselves in his crosshairs. We've seen Meta and ABC settle suits brought on by the president. Now, with executive orders being used to target what might be perceived as Trump's enemies, what type of a threat do you think this poses to the legal system?
It certainly has made a lot of difficult decisions for executives at these companies and firms that have been targeted. And you see the differences in approach playing out just in these.
See, now, you know, first of all, I know they're using the word targeted. These firms aren't targeted. They put themselves on the radar by trying to destroy a man. That's what they did. I mean, this whole thing about he didn't just pick them out somewhere and say, I don't like that law firm and I don't like law firm B or C. These law firms came after him. Right. And in the midst, you know, while they were doing that under the Biden administration, they might have had a lot of government contracts and they pretty much thought he was going to go to jail. So he would have never got elected. So they thought they were safe. And now that he's president, he's looking over those contracts saying, you know, maybe I can't have these people around me who are plotting against me while I'm in office. So you know, look at the whole thing with Meta and ABC or CBS and all these guys who had something bad to say or something wrong to say, CBS, about Trump. They did that. They had wrongdoing. There was some wrongdoing. Right. And so he's getting some retribution out of that. He's getting some revenge on top of that. So listen, I can't see how you blame the man for not turning the other cheek. I wouldn't if I was him.
Now 3 big law firms that have been targeted by the president. We've been talking a lot about what Paul Weiss did. They went to the White House and sought a deal. There's a second firm that's actually suing the president in court, trying to get a judge to block his executive order. And then the third firm that's been targeted, Covington, they also haven't filed a lawsuit or struck any sort of deal. So a bit more unclear what they're doing. But I did notice that this week they actually are the lawyers on a new lawsuit challenging the Trump administration. So at least on that lawsuit, they decided not to back down.
Oh,
All right, we'll leave it at that. Zach Schoenfeld, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
As President Trump and his administration ramp up attacks on U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, Representative Brandon Gill, a Republican from Texas, has filed articles of impeachment. Gill and 16 co-sponsors are targeting Boasberg over his moves to block the deportation of Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador and Boasberg's inquiry into whether the Trump administration ignored his orders. Joining me to discuss this and more, Michael Schnell, congressional reporter here at The Hill. Michael, Trump was asked about Judge Boasberg today at the White House. Let's take a listen.
They're tough people. They're bad people. We don't want them in our country. We can't let a judge say that he wants him. He didn't run for president. He didn't get much more than 80 million votes. And we just can't let that happen. It'd be so bad for our country.
So does Speaker Mike Johnson?
Now, we got to look at this district judge situation, thinking they could run the executive branch by putting up these bullshit overreach questions out there, stays and injunctions. Listen, the Supreme Court needs to act, right? That's what, if I was the Republicans, you got to go and tell Roberts to get off your ass and act. You can't run a country by every podunk asshole judge who is a left-wing lug nut that can stop every action I make. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's a bit much already. So the Supreme Court, what the hell are you doing? I mean, what are you guys doing? You're the equal branch of the government with the executive and the legislative branch. So why are you silent on this? Now, I agree with Judge Roberts when he came out and said, listen, you don't like what this asshole was talking about, judge is talking about, just, go through the appellate process. Yeah, but we can't take 4 years to do it. You guys could be preemptive because Clarence Thomas already said he doesn't like what he sees, but what these district judges are doing, and it's purely political. I mean, you can see it's lawfare, right? Some of these things, the executive is clearly within his rights to do, and how are you going to tell? How's a judge going to say, "Hey, I want to go line by line, person by person, whether I think this person or that person should be deported"? That's not up for the judge. It's not. If they're here illegally and they don't have their paperwork, you can't tell me to keep them here. So, and if you can't, now, this is what, the only thing I can say is if you're going to send anybody to that Escape from New York monster house down in El Salvador, you got to be damn sure that you can't put just a person who overstayed their visa, in that mix. You just can't send, and it's got sending the hardened criminals there is one thing, right? They deserve what they get, murder, rape, and all the other stuff that they've done. But if you have a couple of guys in there because they just overstayed a student visa, which is a civil case, but they want to deport them, you got to be very careful that they don't get mixed up in that ring and end up in that monster house in El Salvador. Yeah, because that place, I can't imagine what goes on in that place. Right? You can't imagine. I would imagine they probably have multiple fatalities every day, every single day. I can't see it not. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, so that's the one thing they have to be careful of. But, kicking people out of the country who don't belong here, it seems like the liberals and the Democrats want to keep all of the dirt around the bathtub ring while everybody's in the tub. You just can't do it. Sometimes you got to clean the water out and wash the tub. You just got to. I mean, and sometimes your friends, if they're here illegally, they're going to go down the drain. Anyway, so let's hear what this lady has to say. The impeachment thing is stupid because it's not going to pass through the Senate at all. It's a waste of time, and she's going to talk about that.
Johnson want to spend valuable floor time on this issue, debating whether or not a district judge should be impeached?
That's the key question here, right? Johnson, I had a piece published this morning. Johnson's in this tricky position where the path forward is very murky. On one hand, he has this immense pressure from President Trump, from Elon Musk, and a number of Republican lawmakers up on Capitol Hill who are pushing for the House to impeach Boasberg. As you mentioned, Brandon Gill introduced an article of impeachment. It charges Boasberg with abuse of power. And there are a lot of Republicans lobbying for this to come up for a vote. On the other side of the coin, though, though, you have a number of moderate Republicans who have voiced concerns about impeaching Boasberg, say they're not in support of it. And it could be a politically difficult vote for a number of those moderates as they look for re-election next year. I spoke to two Republicans yesterday, Don Bacon, Republican from Nebraska, and Dusty Johnson, a Republican from South Dakota. They both told me that they are not in favor of this push. And then I heard from a House GOP source who said there are dozens who feel the same way behind the scenes. So Mike Johnson is going to have to weigh this issue when Congress returns to session next week. Does he appease President Trump and Musk and a number of his hardline conservative members, or does he protect folks who don't want to take this vote and maybe protect Trump even from an embarrassing vote because it would likely fail?
I wonder if for people like Representative Gill, just bringing it up, kind of dragging the judge through the mud with these threats is accomplishing their goal of, maybe intimidating judges that might seek to block the Trump administration.
Perhaps, very well could be. We've also seen articles of impeachment against some other district judges who have made decisions and published opinions that have been against the Trump administration's moves. I will note, though, one question, open question, lingering question that's going to be key to this situation is whether or not Brandon Gill or any of these other Republicans force a vote on the articles of impeachment. If he makes his resolution privileged, he can go to the House floor, force a vote on it, and compel leadership to act on the legislation within 2 legislative days. Now, Johnson would likely either hold a vote to refer it to committee, the Judiciary Committee, which oversees impeachment, or he can hold a vote to table it. The third option, of course, putting the article on the floor for a vote of the full House, which is unlikely to happen. But you mentioned in the beginning, Drew, this would waste precious floor time on an effort that is never going to go anywhere, because even if the impeachment does squeak through in the House, which is a big if because of that skepticism, it's not going anywhere in the Senate. In order to remove an impeached judge, you need a supermajority, 67 votes. Even if all Republicans are on board in the Senate, and there are some who have cast out, you need at least 14 Democrats to support it as well. That is never going to happen. So maybe Gill has accomplished his goal by just introducing this article. Maybe he'll try to go a step further by forcing a vote on it. But again, this all leads to Speaker Johnson's in about how to handle whether or not to bring up this resolution for a vote, and B, what to do if somebody forces a vote on it.
Yeah, I wonder.
It's really not that prickly of a position, because you know what, Trump is not asking for this impeachment. It's just congressman, and so Johnson just needs to say, listen, you know what, you could rattle your sabers and all you want. We're not going to waste time on the floor talking about impeaching a judge where we know we can't impeach him. The embarrassment is not enough. What the administration has to do, and Trump, you got this crack team, your DOJ and everybody else, you guys got to find a way to make the Supreme Court act. That's as simple as that. All the rest of it is bullshit. Hey, Judge Roberts, man, get your Supreme Court guys together and give us a ruling on what these assholes from the district level, what they can do and what they can't do. Now, I'm calling them assholes because that's the way they're acting. They're trying to circumvent the will of the people. You have an election. Elections have consequences, and you can't just put yourself in a way, hiding behind your robe. I guess you can, but you're wrong. Because when they start looking at the statistics, they put these injunctions of, it's like 10, 20 times more on President Trump over his first term and this term than they've had any other president. So it's complete lawfare. I don't think President Trump stretches or interprets the executive branch, the power of the executive branch, any more than anybody else. Right? You test the boundaries. I can dig it. I can give you an example. I had an issue with at least one of the executive orders, and that was the one about birthright citizenship. And of course, even with the Department of Education, he could put out these executive orders dismantling that or taking away birthright citizenship. It's really up to Congress for the Department of Education to really abolish it. You could reduce it, maybe change some of its functions around, but you can't get rid of it without a vote. And the same thing with birthright citizenship. Listen, you got to get an interpretation from the Supreme Court on how they interpret the 14th Amendment, right? Okay, because we know that it was originally written for black slaves, but like the Constitution itself, the whole document was written to make this place a safe haven for white people, right? And we know that as we interpret the Constitution, it was written in such a way that all people can benefit from its articles. So, so there you have it. So the 14th, yeah, was just for black people, but the way it's written, you can drive a truck through some of that stuff. Anyway, so let's go.
Wonder if Democrats would welcome this. Like, go ahead, waste your time, and divide your conference.
I mean, perhaps that's a possibility. Look, we have seen House Democrats really hammer away at this effort, saying that this is not what you do. You don't impeach a judge just because you don't agree with their decision. That's what the appeals process is for. But you bring up a good point. The narrative for the better part of the past 2 weeks has been this Democratic infighting, right? It happened with the government funding bill. We've seen a lot of folks be going after Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries going after one another. That's been the narrative, that this rebuilding period for Democrats does not seem to have been making any progress. A potential way to distract from that, and in Washington, oftentimes folks have a difficult time paying attention to more than one story. The distraction could be letting Republicans fight with one another about impeachment. That's, of course, one of the downfalls and the pitfalls that could come if Johnson pursues this, or if a House Republican forces a vote on it. So again, that's another really important thing to think about here. Do Republicans really want to shift the narrative right now from the negative coverage of Democrats?
And some Republicans are looking for other options to punish judges they see as overstepping their bounds. There's been this talk of cutting funding for district courts, or even limiting the ability for judges to impose nationwide injunctions. Wouldn't that all face similar roadblocks in the House and definitely in the Senate?
Likely, yes. There's the bill that you mentioned about the injunctions, the second one. Jim Jordan, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, he actually referenced that legislation this week, saying that this could be a potential avenue if impeachment is not going to work. The Judiciary Committee did advance that legislation last month, so it could come to the floor for a vote. But you're right. I'm sure there would still be some apprehension to that. And let's not forget, Drew, House Republicans are still grappling with this ultra thin majority, right? So even if they're 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 Republicans who are against something, if all Democrats are also in opposition, that could be enough to sink the priority. So Johnson has to also weigh, what am I bringing to the floor? What would be a good alternative? But would that alternative even have enough support? Because in the House, you need near unanimity. Now, I will note, we've seen President Trump, this 11th hour intervention he's done in a number of major legislative undertakings, cajoling a number of skeptics, Republicans who were at one point opposed. Minutes after a phone call with Trump, they're in support. He's had a pretty good track record of doing that in his beginning months in office, but something like this could derail that.
Let's quickly get out of Washington. I want to ask you about this Wisconsin Supreme Court race. Early voting has begun. Both Republicans and Democrats have been pouring resources into this race. Why do you think it's become such a focus? And is it a bellwether, a referendum on the initial part of the Trump administration?
Yeah, so 2 things. The first one thing I was going to mention the bellwether. We always talk, in Washington, we crave to understand what the electorate is saying, what the electorate is thinking. And we try to use these off-year races as a way to read how the American people feel. Will this be a bellwether? I'm not sure. But look, we've had a first about almost 3 full months of the Trump administration, a number of controversial acts coming from the White House, things that Democrats have been up in arms about. Some Republicans have criticized. Most Republicans have cheered on. I think a lot of folks are wondering, aside from those town halls that we've seen across the country, how are voters feeling? How are they going to vote in response to this? So on one hand, you're right. It could be a bellwether. I'm not sure if it will be. We'll have to.
Of course, it's going to be a bellwether if you're talking about either side's going to use it as, not an indictment, but an acknowledgement that, what they're doing is right, especially if the Democrats get that seat, right? If they get that seat, that's all we're going to hear. See, the Republicans, nobody really likes them. Now, listen, he won Wisconsin, right? So it's going to be both sides going to want to be able to use this win to their benefit. So it's going to be a bellwether whether we like it or not. So let's not mince words here. I understand what she's trying to say, that, it really is not going to be a predictor of what's going to happen in the midterms. But man, they're gonna both use it for that. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade.
To see those results. But on the other hand, it's really interesting. It's going to be a referendum, I think, maybe on Elon Musk's power and influence. Musk has really gone all in supporting the Republican candidate in this Wisconsin Supreme Court race. I think a lot of folks are wondering to see how much influence and pull he has among the American electorate. This won't be the surefire answer, but it could surely give us some clues about how folks feel about
That's
Elon
another
Musk.
One of the
reason
major
why I'm
focuses
right.
of the Democratic attack ads in that race, Elon Musk. So it'll be an interesting test
That's
run
right.
to see how effective that is for Democrats. We'll leave it at that. Michael Snow, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
The United Kingdom has become the latest country to issue a travel warning for the United States. The updated advice is warning travelers of harsh consequences for British passport holders who violate U.S. immigration laws. The instructions warn citizens to comply with all entry and visa requirements or risk being arrested or detained. The warning comes on the heels of Germany issuing similar advice earlier this week after 3 of its citizens were detained at the San Diego-Tijuana border. Earlier in March, a British national was detained in the U.S., according to the UK Foreign Office. A Canadian woman was also recently detained by ICE. The detainments are stirring concern among American allies as the Trump administration continues its immigration crackdown. That's today's.
Well, you got to have your paperwork in order, right? I mean, listen. If you're coming overseas on a visa, you got to just have all your paperwork in order. You got to pass through customs and places like that. And if your paperwork is sketchy, you're going to get stopped. That's probably the way it should work anyway. So these travel warnings is just Europe's way of trying to be relevant. The truth of the matter is nobody should travel outside of their country without having their paperwork in tip-top shape. All the dates, all the signatures, all the shit that you need to prove who you are and why you are in another country. It's as simple as that. I mean, let's not go crazy. Anyway, that was enough. This guy's ending the show anyway, so that's enough for this. I appreciate you guys stopping in. Hit the like button. Hit the like button. Hit the like button. Art Payne, marriage, politics, and sports. Over and out.